In this movie, I'll show you how to combine dashes and round caps to create a dotted outline. And we'll be using that dotted outline to create this gear logo in the lower left corner of the artwork. And for your viewing pleasure, I've gone ahead and created a second window into this document in which we're zoomed in tight. Our first order of business will be to create this white rim that's tracing around the inside of the circle. So I'm going to switch over to my artwork in progress, and you can see that I have just two path outlines. A white lightning bolt that I drew with the pen tool, and then an orange circle that, of course, I drew with the ellipse tool. I'll go ahead and select that orange circle, and then switch to the Appearance panel by going to the Window menu and choosing the Appearance command. My stroke panel is so big that I can't barely see anything going on inside the Appearance panel, so I'll click the double arrow icon just once to slightly contract the panel. And then I'll click on the Fill option here inside the Appearance panel, and I'll drop down to the second icon in the lower left corner of the panel, Add New Fill, and I'll click on it in order to add a new fill, and I'll change that fill to white. Now I need to make the fill smaller, so I'll make sure that the fill is selected. That's very important. Then go up to the Effect menu, choose Distort and Transform, and choose the Transform command. And through trial and error, I came up with scale values of 75% for both horizontal and vertical. Now if I turn on the Preview checkbox, you can see that that creates an inset white circle. All right, now click OK to accept the effect. And you can see that the transform effect is assigned strictly to the white fill. Now I want to create a copy of that fill by clicking on it to make it active, and then you click on the little page icon at the bottom of the panel. And that goes ahead and copies not only the white fill, but its transform effect as well. And I'll go ahead and switch the color of the fill to orange. And by the way, if you don't have access to the sample file, I'll go ahead and show you the CMYK values by double-clicking on this gold shadow swatch here in the swatches panel. This particular orange is C15, M50, and Y100. As you can see, the black K value is set to 0%. So I'll go ahead and cancel out. Now, because this fill is transformed to the same extent as the fill behind it, it goes ahead and covers it up. So we need to make it smaller by clicking on the word transform under the orange fill. And I'm going to change both the horizontal and vertical values this time around to 64%. Turn on the Preview checkbox, and we end up getting this effect here. That makes it look like the lightning is actually coming out of the circle, like it's actually drawn into it. Then I'll click OK in order to apply that effect. Now the next thing that we want to do is add a dotted stroke. But before I show you that effect, because it's a rather specific application, I'm going to show you what dotted strokes look like in general. So we'll go ahead and scroll up a little bit, and I'll draw a line like so using the line tool. Just a horizontal line, so I press the Shift key as I was dragging it. And then I'll change the line weight value, let's say to 10 points. And I end up with a thick black line. Now I can see my stroke panel up over here on the right-hand side of the screen. That's great because that way I'm not covering up the artwork. I'll go ahead and turn on the dashed line checkbox, and we end up seeing the last dashed line we applied, the one from the previous movie. I'm going to change the dash value to 0, and I'll leave the gap value set to 12 points for now. You can see that ends up creating these tiny little dashes, these sort of line spikes here, that probably won't survive the print process, but each and every dash is regarded by the stroke panel as an endpoint. So that means you can put a cap onto it. So if you throw on a projecting cap, you'll end up tracing squares around each one of those dashes. Whereas if you throw on a round cap, you'll trace circles around them. Now they're only circles because the dash value is set to 0. I'll go ahead and expand this gap value to say 24, just so that I have plenty of room here. And if I start taking that dash value up, you can see that the dots transform into good and plenties here, so that we're tracing half circles around the outside of each one of the dashes. That's why it's very important if you want a classic dotted outline, you want the dash value to be set to 0, and then you want the gap value typically to be set to twice the line weight. In this case, that would be 20 points. All right, so that's your standard everyday average dotted outline. We're going to create a special application here. So I'm going to press the backspace key or the delete key on the Mac, press the V key to switch back to the black arrow tool, and click on that circle once again. All right, so what we want to do, I'm going to scroll down a little bit here and switch back to the final version of the artwork. You'll see that I'm cutting these circular grooves in the outside of the circle, and those are round dashes that are doing the work for me. So we've got a gear that's a kind of bicycle gear, actually, as opposed to a watch gear, if you will. Anyway, I'm going to switch back, and I'll, of course, look down here to the Appearance panel. I'm going to go ahead and collapse my stroke panel further so I have more room to work. I want to add a white stroke, so I'll go ahead and change the color of that stroke, which is currently none, to white. I'll go ahead and increase my line weight value to 9 points so that we end up with this thick white stroke. And now I'll click on the word stroke to bring up the pop-up panel so you can get to this panel from all over the place, including here inside the appearance panel. And now I'm going to do the classic stuff here. I'm going to turn on the dash line checkbox, and I've got a 0-point dash, 20-point gap. I really don't know what the gap should be, but I do know that I want to turn on the round cap. And I end up with these gears, and they look like, all right, that's okay. But let's say you want a very specific number of gears. Like I knew I wanted 16 gear holes tracing around this circle. That's what I ultimately came up with. Well, you're going to have to do some math. That's the warning for you. Here's what you do. First of all, you got to figure out how big this circle is. So you go to the window menu while the circle's selected, and you choose the info command. And then you see, oh, by golly, the width and height of the circle are 70 points. So that means we've got a 70-point diameter because the radius would be half of the width of the circle, and the diameter is the full width of the circle. So we've got 70 points. Somehow we have to translate that into the circumference of the circle. Now, I'll tell you, I was a math major in school. I should know all this stuff, but I've forgotten just about all of it. So what I do, like any reasonable person, is I go to the internet. And so you can find sites that will actually, you just dial in a diameter value, and it will automatically tell you what the circumference of that circle is. So just do a search. And then we take the circumference, which I found out was 219.91 points. And you divide it by 16. And so you whip out your trusty calculator, and you come up with 13.744. All right, so fair enough. Go to the stroke panel, bring it back up here. Our dash is 0, so we don't even have to think about the dash value. All we do is just dial in 13.744 into the gap value because that's a 16th of the circumference, and then I'll press the tab key and see how it looks. Now, if it doesn't look exactly right, and by exactly right, I mean, notice this circle at top is centered on that anchor point, and this one's centered on the right point, and this one's centered on the bottom, and this one's centered on the left-hand point, and that's exactly what I want. But this is a situation in which lines, dashes to corners and path ends can actually mess things up. So what you want to do, if you know you've got the right values, is turn on preserves exact dash and gap lengths. And that may not make much of a difference because I've got such exact values in here. I happen to nail it. However, in your work, if you're trying out these kinds of effects, you may find that it's useful to switch back to that old style option. All right, and that's it. I'll go ahead and hide the stroke panel, click off the shape in order to deselect it, and we end up with an automatically constructed gear shape. Didn't require any drawing whatsoever, thanks to our ability to create dotted outlines by combining dashes with round caps here inside Illustrator.